give a couple minutes for people to start joining. And while you guys are logging in, getting comfortable, making sure you have a glass of water, I'm just going to pull up our questions document. So the way we're going to work today is I've got a bunch of questions that were submitted online, and you can also put questions in the chat. And I'm going to start with going through the questions that were submitted in advance. You can type your questions into the chat. If there's time at the end, I will, let you, come on and speak your question. I do want to keep, the questions that you guys are asking like fairly short. I don't want it to turn into, sometimes on these calls, it's one person who wants to talk about a really long and personal situation that doesn't apply to anybody else. And I would rather it not turn into that, because I want to get everybody who shows up to have as much value as possible. If you do want, very personalized assistance, you can sign up for an individual consultation with me, and we will get you the link to do that. And the other reason is, of course, this webinar is being recorded, so we're going to be streaming to Facebook, and then we're also going to be sharing it after the event so people can watch the replay. Oh, I see. Hi, Karen. Hi, Erin. Hi, Agnes. Hi, Chris. A lot of faces that I know, or I guess I can't see your faces, but a lot of people, a lot of names I recognize, which is always nice. And then the other thing we're going to do is we're going to share this to the Americans in France group, and then we'll get started. So I've got, will you briefly talk about entrepreneur visas? Sure. We'll start with that one since it's in the chat. Feel free to put your questions in the chat as well. And then I have the questions that have been pre-submitted that I've got on my Google Doc. So I will just be going through those in the order that they were submitted. We'll see how it goes. And I've got about 1 hour. Okay, so briefly talk about entrepreneur visas. All right, so there are 4 kinds of visas that you need to know about if you want to be self-employed. So the first visa type, which is the simplest one to get, in my opinion, and the best one to get, is the Profession Libérale Auto-Entrepreneur visa. And so this visa type is for self-employed people who are going to be registering as an auto-entrepreneur or a micro-entrepreneur, who are going to be earning less than 72,500 euros per year through billing multiple clients. So there's a lot of ways that you can be successful with this type of visa application. It involves putting together a business plan, and it involves putting together, a plan for the types of clients that you're going to work with, the types of income that you're going to have, how much you're going to charge people, and most importantly, where you're going to have clients and income sources in France. So the challenge for this visa type is that it's a really good one if you want to work remotely, if you want to work with clients all over the world, if you already have sources of income that come from, clients outside of France, that's great. But it's really important in that visa application to not limit yourself to clients and income streams outside of France. And it's really important to show how you're going to be potentially earning money within France from French clients or from European source clients. And that can be a difficult, challenging balance to strike. However, it's basically my favorite visa to write. You get a lot of really fun, different kinds of projects, anything from teaching English to, web design, to textbook editing, to graphic design, to photography. Any type of service that you could potentially do would be a great choice for this category. Now, the other thing that you do need to take into consideration is that you usually can't offer to do, or you can't propose doing a service that you're not actually legally eligible to do in France. If you are in a regulated profession and you can't exercise in France, then it's not a good idea to do a visa application for that profession. The other two visa types, the other three self-employment visa types I'll touch on quickly. There's profession artistique, which can be a combination of self-employment, short-term salaried contracts, royalties. You have a wide variety of income streams that you can potentially do on that visa. So that would be ideal, for example, if you're a musician and you're going to perform with orchestras and you're going to record music on an album and you're going to teach music lessons, those would be three different income streams that are going to be three different types of registrations, but they would all fall under the category of the artistic visa. Now, what you can't do on the artist visa is like, okay, I'm a musician and I'm going to perform, but then I'm also going to teach English. That, doesn't work. And then the final types are if you want to start an actual company. There's the Passeport Talent Entrepreneur, which requires having a master's degree and a 30,000 euro investment for each person who wants to participate in running the company. And then a commerçant visa for if you're starting a company, but not making a 30,000 euro investment. So if maybe like my company didn't require a 30,000 euro investment because it's not like, it's my computer and me and an internet connection. So, that type of service business, you don't necessarily need a big investment. And then you just want to look at, where's your income going to be? Is it going to be under 72,000 euros per year? Start with profession libérale. Is it going to be over 72,000 euros per year? Go for commerçant. Are you going to be selling products that require a lot of expenses? Go for either commerçant or passeport talent, depending on the amount of materials you're going to have to buy. All right, so I'm going to go over to the questions that were pre-submitted. At the end, can you repeat the first visa type? The first visa type that I just went over was profession libérale auto-entrepreneur. All right. Okay, so Kathleen has submitted a question for submitting. When I submit a non-French birth certificate, do I need one that is recent? Apostille then translate, or translate then apostille. So it depends on the purpose for which you're submitting the birth certificate. So normally for a visa application, you don't need to provide a birth certificate, but for certain administrative procedures in France, you do. So things like signing up for health insurance is going to be like one of the first situations in which you're going to need a birth certificate. So it also depends on whether it's an EU birth certificate or what language the birth certificate is in. I assume that most people on the call are American, but I'm just going to go over, in case there's anybody who's not. If you're in the EU, you can get a multilingual birth certificate that will have, the language of the country and French, and that's what I would recommend you do. There are certain languages that will be accepted by EU administration, so English, Spanish, German, Italian, and maybe Arabic. I'm not sure on the Arabic. And those ones do not need to be translated for certain circumstances. So things like submitting for health insurance, you don't actually need to provide a translation. Things like renewing your visa application, you're going to want to provide a translation. Now, apostille generally isn't going to be required unless like you're applying for, you're either getting married or you're going to be naturalized as a French citizen. In most cases, I don't think you are going to need an apostille birth certificate. Second question, which is really interesting. I have a contact at the Department of Motor Vehicles in Oregon who has expressed willingness to sign a reciprocity agreement with France, but I have to make the initial contact. Who should I contact? Portland contact is not replying, nor is the embassy in Washington. So I would start with the French consulate in San Francisco because Oregon is in the San Francisco circumscription. You can also potentially reach out to Roland Lescure, who is the representative of French people in the Americas. And his Facebook page is really active. A lot of people have been following him because of the travel restrictions and all of the updates during the past year. I'll type his name in the chat. You can just search his name on Facebook and his page will pop right up. The other thing is to potentially contact ANTS in France. They're the, administration that processes, driver's license exchanges and things like that. The National Agency for Secure Documents. And so all things to do, If you are changing your driver's license, it goes through them. Honestly, I don't know at what level the person would have to be, but I do also know there was a post in the Americans in France group within the past month or two that basically said, there was some legislation that if you could prove that a US state, or that, a state outside of France was exchanging French licenses for US licenses, or for that, country or state's licenses, then you could exchange a license from that state for a French license. All right. So thanks for those great questions. Keep us posted on, if there's anything that we can do to help facilitate that situation. I agree that that would be super helpful for anybody. All right. This is a question from Richard. Do I have to go through the integration contract process to get a long-term visa? Okay, so I assume that what you're talking about is that article from the Washington Post from a couple weeks ago that, had an article about the OFI validation process and how, French people or people who want to move to France are basically required to agree to certain French principles and ways of doing things. So politics of that article aside, I'll explain the process to you, what you have to do. The extent to which you have to go through the OFI validation process depends on your visa type. You specifically asked about a long stay visitor visa type, but I'll just give an overview of the validation process for the different visa types. Now, if you are the spouse of a French citizen, you're going to have one process. If you're the spouse of an EU citizen, you do not have to go through this integration process. You're exempt from it. If you are a talent passport holder, you do not have to go through this process either. And if you are a student and have done more than a certain number of years of study in a French university, if you have any kind of French degree, you'll do a part of the OFI validation process, but you don't have to go through the full integration day thing. So if you're on a visitor visa, then what you're going to do is validate your visa with OFI, and that involves paying a tax of 225 euros roughly online. And you'll get a letter in the mail or in your email inviting you to come in for a medical visit and a little chat. And basically, they talk to you, they ask you if you've gotten all your vaccinations. You don't have to provide any medical records. You don't have to do anything fancy, but it's really just an interview. It's going to be 2 afternoons, and then your visa is validated. They give you a certificate, and that's it. You're going to need to hang on to that certificate so that you can renew your visa. They're going to ask for it at the first renewal. If you're a student, then all you have to do is validate your visa online. You don't have to go into any medical visit. You don't have to go into any interview, anything like that. Now, a lot of these other visa types, you're going to have to register online. As the spouse of a French citizen, you're going to have the medical visit, and then you're also going to have these integration days. Now, all the integration days is it's a 4-day stage. So you go for 4 days, and basically they tell you about how to be French, and they talk about, the French values of liberty and equality and fraternity and all of that. And they tell you, things like you're not allowed to have multiple wives in France, stuff like that. Stuff to ensure that, the immigrants who are coming are going to respect, the equality of the sexes. They know the overview of French laws to follow and a little bit of French history and things like that. There's also going to be a language test. It's not a language test to admit you to France. It's a language test to evaluate whether or not you're eligible for any free language classes. The language classes are sort of given out on the basis of who speaks French the worst. So if you have 0 French when you do the test, you might get a certain number of hours of classes. If you have, more than a basic level, you're probably not going to be eligible for any free classes. So that's really just, kind of luck of the draw based on based on when you go, how many spots they have available, and how much better or worse your French is than anybody else's. Is this process also applicable to somebody coming in with an EU citizenship or passport? No. If you're an EU citizen, you don't have to do anything. You don't have to register. You don't have to validate any visa. It's held at your local OFI office. So they will send you an email telling you where to go and when. You don't want to miss it. You have to show up on time. You don't want to miss it. If you do miss it, that could potentially jeopardize renewing your visa. You know, your job is required to give you time off. It's not, it's not optional. Like if you do have to miss it for something really important, then, you do have to contact the OFI office and they'll try to reschedule you and accommodate you once, but it's not something you want to miss more than once. I've tried to register online, but have not gotten the email from a medical visit. It's been a month. Is that normal? It has not been nearly long enough to get a response yet. For reasons that I do not understand, after a year and a half of pandemic where nobody was moving to France, or very few people were moving to France, most of the people moving to France were talent passport holders who are not required to go through the OFI process at all. They are still extraordinarily behind. And so I would expect it to take 6 to 8 weeks to get a response. So there's nothing to worry about. They're not going to penalize you. You're supposed to do the OFI validation within 90 days of arriving in France, depending on when you find a permanent address to put on your form. Sometimes you already have a place to live when you arrive and you can do it really fast. Sometimes, you're looking for an apartment and you don't want to put down an address until you find your permanent place to live, and it's more like 4 to 6 weeks. Both of those are totally fine. Just hang tight until they get back to you, but they will. And keep checking your spam. All right, so if we move to a reciprocal state for 1 month to get a driver's license, will this move affect our visa application, or will the recent issue date of the license be a problem? We will have 20 plus years to report from the previous license. That is completely luck of the draw. I have clients who have done it and who have successfully gotten an exchange. I have a couple who did it. One of same situation. They had both had the same sequence of licenses from, their initial license in the 70s in like Massachusetts, and then they switched 2 or 3 times to ended up with California, switched California to, I think, Maryland, and the Maryland license dated from maybe 4 months or so before they actually moved to France. Hers went right through. I emailed back and forth with them for several weeks. Can you provide, can we provide a history of, the driving insurance from, the past 25 years? And then they were like, well, when did he originally get his license? Can you give us the record of that? And he was like, well, it was 50 years ago. Like, there is no record to get of that. So that one was a little bit more, it was really complicated for one of them and really easy for the other one. And they were submitted the same day. They had the exact same information. I did them both. There's really no way to predict. If you plan on doing something like that, getting a different license before moving to France, I would advise doing it as early in the process as you possibly can, so that, your length of time on that exchangeable license is as long as possible before you actually arrive in France. And then, get like copies of your driving record, copies of, insurance records, things like that. So as much, and this is something, for our clients who do have licenses that can be exchanged, this is something that we include in our VIP packages. All right, so that one was answered. All right, I'm going to go back to the questions that were submitted in the form. All right. I was curious to know how it works if you have a US SCorp. That's a broad question, but I know who's asking it, so I know what direction this is going to go. So I assume you mean if you're doing something like starting a business in France while also having a US-based business. I think a US SCorp is mostly neutral to the process of applying for any type of entrepreneurship visa. As much as possible, I want to be showing on your visa application what income is going to come in France. We're going to take a little walk over here to let the cat out of this room. I don't think a US SCorp helps or hurts your visa application. And I think that's going to be a question for an accountant is, if you have income in multiple countries, does it help you to run some of the US income through the SCorp, to cover the SCorp's expenses and things like that? And could that potentially, reduce your tax burden or reportable income in France? You couldn't be taking a salary from the SCorp because, your company could not declare you as an employee in France without paying social charges and stuff like that you probably want to avoid. There is a way to register a foreign company in France such that it can have an employee in France. That's something you might want to consider with an accountant, but I really don't think that in most cases that's going to be that useful to you. It could be a good way, for example, if you wanted to continue making qualified retirement contributions, the corporation could pay you a salary of which as much as possible gets contributed to an individual retirement plan, a self-employed retirement plan on your behalf. That's sort of the direction I would go in terms of like questions to ask you. But in terms of actually what you want to show in your business plan for a visa application, I don't think you want to really refer to it at all. All right, this one. What is the cost of living in Strasbourg? I couldn't tell you. The answer to that question. You're going to have to, for something like that, cost of living, you're going to have to look at, individual cities and what the rents are on various websites, and then how much you want to travel. Living in a smaller city like Strasbourg, it's going to be lower than Paris, but that's, without more information, I can't really answer that question. How challenging is it to learn the language? Do you recommend immersion schools or a tutor? Again, that's going to really depend on how much time you have. Like, are you going to have the time to do a full immersion program? Are you going to, be working? Are you going to be talking with French people? Have you studied the language before? Have you studied other languages before? And that's a fairly broad question. And, what purpose are you going to be using the language for? Are you going to be like learning for fun and just because you want to talk to people? It can take a little bit longer if you don't have like a targeted way to learn or specific goals. If you're just like studying grammar with a tutor, that's going to be harder than, if you're immersed in, a job and talking to colleagues all day and like reading up on things in your field, you're going to learn that vocabulary a lot faster. All right, this is a question from a different Richard. Given that the EU has removed the US from its safe list of countries, what changes are likely to come for the French government with regard to non-essential travel by US citizens? Will fully vaccinated Americans still be allowed into France for non-essential travel? I didn't bring my crystal ball today, so unfortunately, I can't really answer that question very well. My suspicion is that because France has the health pass, and basically to do anything you need either a vaccine or, full vaccine or a negative test less than 72 hours old. My suspicion is that they're going to want to keep American tourist dollars and that they're not going to reimpose restrictions on US citizens. My thought is that at the worst, what we're looking at is like maybe travelers to, vaccinated travelers to France also needing to provide a negative test. I can't promise that, but that's my thought. I mean, and it also depends too on whether or not Biden is going to lift travel restrictions to the US, because the EU is now more vaccinated than the US. Travel restrictions on European citizens have been in place for something like 700 days now. I think it's going to turn into a question of politics if Biden continues to keep the borders closed, which there's really no good reason now for why the borders are closed to EU citizens at this point. I don't see why France couldn't reimpose restrictions. You need one of the authorized vaccines. You need to be at least 7 days beyond your second dose if it's a 2-dose vaccine, or a month, I believe, beyond your second or beyond your only dose of the Johnson & Johnson. So the authorized vaccines are Pfizer, Moderna, AstraZeneca, and the Johnson & Johnson, also called Janssen. As of right now, you don't have to have a negative test if you're vaccinated in order to enter France. But if you're traveling through another country, then the other country could potentially require it. All right, I'm going to go to some of the questions in the chat, and then I'll go back to the ones that were pre-submitted. What's the visa to get for a 63-year-old who wants to retire in France? Once you get that visa, can you then pay into the French healthcare system? So if you're completely retired and you don't ever plan on working or earning money, then you're going to get a long stay visitor visa. And you want to make sure that when you put together the application, that you're going to be getting the renewable visa if you plan on staying in France for more than 1 year. So the issue that can sometimes come up for people who are retiring is that they end up with a non-renewable visa called a long séjour temporaire, which there's no way to extend or convert or renew or anything in France. And so you want to be really careful when you're doing one of those visa applications. If you do plan on having other sources of income, working online, working remotely, things like that, then we want to have a conversation to see whether or not that's really the best visa for you. Now, the other thing you need to keep in mind is with the retirement visa, it's really hit or miss whether or not you can eventually get a 10-year residency card. If you're not magically going to get the right to work at some point, and it's basically going to be a no-go for applying for naturalization. So you're not going to be able to become a French citizen. And the reason for that is, you're not going to be paying any French taxes, especially as an American. Most of your income, according to the tax treaty, is going to be taxed in the US. Now, there is, in our Fast Track to France course that we released in June, we do have an extensive module on the tax treaties between France and the US, what types of income are taxed where, what questions you want to ask your accountant, things like that, so that you can do sort of your financial planning and visa planning at the same time. And we're going to be re-releasing that in October. So if you have questions about that, you'll probably want to check that out and go through, the different questions about taxes and stuff. Is there a list of what states? I assume you mean for driver's licenses. And yes, there is a list of what states will exchange. There's about 14. And maybe Kim can do a quick search. If you just Google, échange, you'll come up with a PDF document that has the list of all the countries, and then within the US and Canada, all the states that can exchange. All right, Allison asks, 64-year-old retiree from California wanting to move to France to be with a US partner, not husband, here on a 4-year talent passport. Will not be driving or working here, have enough funds to self-support. Visa advice. My advice in that situation, you can absolutely apply for a visitor visa. My one concern, which you have alleviated in your question, is you want to make sure that you have enough funds. Generally speaking, if you're not married to somebody, France does not want to give you a visa to be with them. And the reason for that is, if you break up and he kicks you out and you have no money and you can't get a plane ticket back home, they don't want to be responsible for you or have you be homeless in France. So, okay. If we apply for Profession Libérale visa, is it possible to change visa types if we're later hired as an employee by a French company or vice versa? If we're hired through a French company and they handle the visa, is it possible to switch to Profession Libérale if the job doesn't work out? So in both situations, that's going to be fairly tricky. If they sponsor you for a visa, you're going to want to stay in the job a certain amount of time before you try to switch visas. I would say you want to be in the job at least a year or two before you even attempt to do any kind of status change. If you get laid off earlier than that, either for economic reasons or because the job doesn't work out, then it depends on how soon, how long you've been in France. If you're on a profession libérale visa and a company wants to sponsor you, then they're going to have to go through the same process of getting approval and submitting your application and proving that you're a better hire than anybody else that they could find. And they're going to have to do that through the online portal. There's a new procedure actually that we're gonna start learning about for approving salaried work visas. But it's basically the same as if they were hiring you from outside of France. You don't get any advantage for already being here and being self-employed. So the kind of thing that I would recommend in this situation is try to negotiate it into a contract position where they're one of your clients. Because really, like I said, that's one of the reasons why profession libérale is my favorite kind of visa, because you're completely in charge of it. Nobody else has any control over your income, over whether or not you can meet your income goals to renew your visa. You're the one in control. If you need to find another client so that you can meet the minimum requirements, the minimum income requirements for applying for French naturalization, you can figure out a package and go out and find another client that's related to the services that you already offer. Whereas, if you are in a salary job and the job doesn't work out, if you're in a toxic environment, if, your boss doesn't like you, then there's really not a lot you can do because you have to stay in the job to keep the visa. Okay, so Kim shared the link to the driver's license exchange in the chat. Thank you, Kim. If you negotiate that company as a client, how many clients do you need? Because we can't just have one client as a profession libérale, correct? Yes, that's correct. So the requirement is to have a second client during the calendar year. Obviously, you want to have a little bit more than, I want people to have a little bit more than that. I want to show that it's not $29,546 as one client and then $456 as a second client. I don't want anybody's visa application to look like that. When I do it, I make sure that we have multiple possibilities and multiple angles for where you're going to go to find clients, and that what those are. It's a minimum of 2 clients, and there's no hard and fast requirement for how, what percentage, I personally think it looks bad if it's, 99.9% one client and 0.1% second client. I like to do, more balanced packages, 40%, 30%, 25%, 5%, or something like that, and have more than one. But, as long as you're showing multiple invoices from multiple clients during the year, you should be fine. Clients working through different agencies who, most of their work came from one agency, but they specified which project it was for on the invoice. There are ways to sort of demonstrate when you're working for different clients or even different projects through the same client to make it look better. I mean, that's something that we talk about with all of our clients. I do want to make you guys aware. So I have a program called the Complete French Business Incubator. It walks you through all of the steps for doing the profession libérale or any of the self-employment visas. We're putting it on sale very soon. I don't think the sales page is up yet, but when it goes on sale, I'm going to be doing a free workshop for people to sign up. So there's going to be a webinar later this month on starting a business in France, and there's going to be a workshop on October 2nd that will help you to develop your business idea. So keep an eye open for that. If you have a lot of questions about this type of visa application, then you'll want to keep a lookout for that. And Amy said she highly recommends it. Oh, thanks, Amy. There was another question up here. Can you talk about how to meet the residency requirements while not knowing where you want to permanently reside? Is an Airbnb okay? How many months for a lease or a rental? So one of the challenges that you can run into when you're renewing your visa is if you don't have a permanent and stable address. If you put on your visa application something like, you intend to move around a lot and live in all the different regions of France, or you can end up with a non-renewable visa. Or if you go to the prefecture and to renew, you haven't had one particular address and you haven't had a stable residence, then they can actually refuse to renew your visa. So you do want to make sure that you're going to have some kind of long-term lease in place. There are a couple of different options. What I usually recommend in terms of getting the initial visa is to rent an Airbnb for like 1 month or maybe 6 weeks to sort of establish a home base, use that to find a more permanent place to live. If it's really your plan to go and live in multiple areas and not settle down in the first year, then I would say go ahead and get that temporary visa, figure out where you want to live. Then you're going to have to return to your home country and apply for a permanent or a renewable visa so that you can go live where you want. And then, coming back, you'll already have the long-term lease, or you will have purchased a house or whatever. If you move and change departments, like once during the year, I would say that's fine. But you do want to establish relatively quickly an address where you can actually get mail, because especially, once you register with OFI, if you're registering an auto entrepreneur activity or a business, you're going to need an address for that. There are domiciliation services that people use when they don't have a fixed address. Usually it's for like homeless people. I haven't looked into it enough to know whether or not it would meet the legal requirements for the prefecture. And I know that it could be particularly difficult to use an address like that for opening a bank account, for example. I think most banks would probably frown on using that kind of address. So that's another challenge you can run into. I would really stress the importance as much as possible of maintaining a long-term residential address that's not just Airbnbs. All right, I'm going to go back to the questions that were submitted online. We've got about 10 minutes left, so I'm going to get through as many questions as I can, but I don't want to keep you for too long. I will give you the link if you want to schedule an individual consultation with me. And then there's also, if you are interested in becoming a client for one of our full service packages for putting together your visa application, you can request a clarity call as well to discuss the package options and to sign up. So let me give you, all right, so I'm putting the link in the chat to schedule a paid 1-hour consultation with me. If you want it's a full hour of my time where you just get to ask me whatever questions you want, it's your agenda. The shorter clarity calls are going to be, talking about what package is right for you, how we might work together on your visa application, just kind of getting to know each other a little bit and seeing if it's a good fit. We don't necessarily have a lot of time on those shorter calls to really get into all of your questions. So that's where the paid consultations come in. All right, so I'm going to go back to the pre-submitted questions. It's less expensive for me to fly into Switzerland, where a friend will drive me down to my lodging in France. Can I book a ticket into Switzerland and with my visa to work in France? Can I arrive 2 weeks before my visa starts in France? So yes, you can fly into Switzerland and then cross the border by land. I would suggest that you get them to stamp your passport so that you have something to show for it. Usually they will do that anyway. And usually it's not a problem to arrive 2 weeks before your visa starts. I would say the only thing that might be an issue is if there are travel restrictions into France for people without visas, then there could be a potential issue there. But under normal circumstances, you're allowed to come into France without a visa, so you can arrive before it starts. Another question, as an auto entrepreneur, do I have to have a round trip ticket for when I arrive? Or can I just buy one way? I would always advise just buying a one-way ticket or not showing a full round trip ticket when you submit your visa application. They no longer ask for you to submit a plane ticket as part of your visa application. And so I sometimes don't even recommend buying it if you're not sure how long it's going to take for your visa application to be processed. Normally, I advise about 1 month between submitting your visa application and actually departing for France, just to make sure that everything comes back, that you have enough time to be prepared to organize animals moving, like things like that. No, you don't have to submit a ticket. I would advise not doing it, especially if you're applying for a long stay visitor visa. One of the things that can cause them to give you a non-renewable visa type instead of a renewable visa type is if you submit a round trip ticket and they see that you're coming back to the US, they might assume that you're coming back permanently and that you don't intend to renew your visa again and to stay. If it has to be a return flight, it does not. Do I have to leave out of France? No, you don't. You just have to, when you leave France, you just have to get them to stamp, and that's not an issue. All right, since it is clear to me that even remote digital work is not allowable in France with a VLSTS, if I decided to return to the US to do contract work on the soil after applying for healthcare there, what are the rules? How long can I be away and still maintain my residency and healthcare status upon return? So theoretically, for a 1-year visa, you're supposed to be in France at least 9 months out of the year. So I would make sure to be in France at least 9 months. You also have to make sure that you're here for the OFI visit, and you have to be present in France in order to renew your visa. So while you can return to the US to do some work, you don't want to spend too much time outside of France. I've had a registered VLS-TS visa since August 4th. How long do I need to wait before I could apply for a Libéral visa here in Paris? If I was offered a job here in Paris with a talent visa, how long would I need to wait until they would process that visa here? Is going back to the US an option to have it processed if the offer was made today? I know this advice may seem a bit flippant because it's too late for you, but if you want to work, don't get a visitor visa. And I mean that in terms of don't get a visitor visa and then look for jobs. Don't get a visitor visa if you want to potentially work online or digitally or remotely or whatever. And I mean, my answer to that question is, if you want to switch your visa status here in Paris, you need to first renew your visitor visa at the end of the first year. So if you had it since August 4th, I would say you need to make your appointment late May 2022. Have your appointment hopefully August, September-ish 2022. They will renew your visa. You'll get your carte de séjour hopefully within 4 months. That puts you at September, October, November, December, January 2023. When you have your card in hand, your carte de séjour visitor mention that you have renewed, then you can walk down to the office to make an appointment for a change of status. They will give you an appointment 2 to 3 months out. So we're looking at March to April 2023. And then at that point, sometimes they will approve it on the day. And sometimes they'll take your business plan and all of your documents and they'll get back to you. It depends a little bit on the type of business you plan to do, what structure you're choosing and things like that. But it's a long process. It's at least 2 years if you come with a visitor visa before you can change. Your other option is to go home at the end of the first year to apply for a new visa. And, this is why, I really advise, if you're going to apply for a Profession Libérale visa, getting professional advice, making sure you know what should be in your business plan and your financial projections. Even if you're planning on doing a visitor visa, I talk to a lot of people who think visitor visa sounds like the right option at the beginning because they're like, well, I'm going to be retired. But then it turns out they want to have the supplemental income, or they want the option of applying for naturalization and things like that. And it's not really a great option. All right. There were a couple more questions that were submitted live that I'm going to pull up. If one applies for a talent passport and it's rejected, will that negatively affect subsequent visa applications in France? Because thereafter, on a French visa application, when they ask you, have you ever been rejected to a French visa? And you have to answer yes. There's not a question on the French visa form, have you ever been rejected to a French visa? So the answer to that is I don't know what kinds of strikes and how long they might hold strikes against you. It's a bit opaque of a situation. My thought is, when depending on the visa type, typically what I want to do is see if there were any weaknesses in the application. So something like a talent passport, either an artist visa or an entrepreneur visa, like, is there another potential client we could ask? Like, did we have enough letters of support in the application? Do we have enough prospective sources of income? Do we have enough potential income sources in France? Are there ways that the visa application could be made stronger? All of my clients know that the guarantee that we offer, like, obviously we can't guarantee that anybody gets their visa. It's just not, it's not within our control. What we do offer is, if it gets rejected, we revise and resubmit at no additional cost to the client one time. This happened during COVID. I had one, it was my first rejection, which kind of stung a little bit, and for the client too, obviously. And it was because of the motif impérieux thing, where we were submitting a talent passport application. It was for somebody who was doing a series of recordings and musical recordings with some colleagues. And it just wasn't really considered enough of an imperative motive, for the application to go through. And for something like that, it wasn't a high income project. It was something that was a little bit vague. The dates were a little bit vague. The amount of money was a little bit vague. We didn't have letters from all the collaborators. There were some things that certainly could have been improved, but we just didn't have the answers to those questions because of COVID. And so in that situation, we go back and look at what would have made this application stronger. Or the other thing that we look at is, are there parts of this application that would be better suited to another visa type? One person that I was working with had a visa type, or had a visa application that we initially wanted to do as Profession Libérale was closed through all of COVID. So we pivoted. We tried to make the visa application sound more artisty, add in some more artistic elements, but it wasn't really an artist visa application. And so in that case, it was not approved. And we just decided, okay, well, we're gonna go back to submitting it as a Profession Libérale application, reinforcing those elements and those letters from potential clients and things like that, as when that visa type opens up again. The things that I think would lead to a more long-term mark, sort of like, mark against your record, are if you say things like, you're applying for a visitor visa or a student visa, but you plan to work, or, you're applying for a visitor visa, but you plan to look for jobs, or you're applying for a student visa, but then, you want to be a nanny full-time while you're studying, or things like that are just clearly not allowed on your visa type. And then, how do you go back and prove that, oh, well, I didn't mean it. I'm not actually going to work on my visa if I'm not allowed to. Like, how do you can't unring the bell. All right, so all the questions that were answered live, I'll take a look in the chat. Okay, so there are no questions in the chat left. I'm going to do one more from the questions that were pre-submitted, and then I'll try to do some Facebook Lives, between now and the next Q&A to answer the questions that were left. So, okay, this question is from, that's super vague question. Okay. We plan on purchasing a home in Brittany in June of 2022. We plan on retiring June of 2024 and becoming full-time residents for a minimum of 7 years and possibly forever. Will owning real estate prior to applying for a long-term visa help us or hurt us? It doesn't hurt. It can certainly help. I mean, you have the advantage of already having, a proof of residence for where you're going to be living, already know what prefecture you're going to be at. You can do your OFI validation as soon as you get here. It reduces the amount in cash that you're going to have to show in your bank accounts in order to get your visa approved, because, they know you're not going to be paying rent. I mean, I don't think there's any issue. There's only there can only be a positive impact from owning real estate prior to living here. Question number 2, how far in advance of our retirement date should we start the process of getting all the paperwork completed to moving to France? So you can't apply for your visa earlier than 90 days before your departure date. You don't need an especially lengthy amount of time to do a visitor visa. Normally our turnaround time when we do them for our clients, we have an initial call. Generally, they provide all the information. We're able to turn them around in about a week, maybe 10 days. And then, it's just a matter of when they provide the information after the call. And so I would say you can do your visitor visa application relatively quickly, and you can apply, a month before your departure date, or you can apply 90 days before your departure date. So it's really up to you in terms of what makes you feel comfortable. If you're considering working with us at your Franceformation, then I would say you want to get in touch with us like maybe end of January, beginning of February, anytime up until, mid-March. Any time in there would be fine to start working with us and to get your visa application done and you leaving in June. All right, that's all we have time for today. I only got through about half the questions that were submitted, but I don't want to keep you on any longer. I want to respect your time, but I will try to answer some more of these questions in the next couple of weeks on the Facebook Live or on Facebook Live or in the Facebook group. Again, you do have my link to schedule a paid consultation with me if you would like a full hour of my time to answer any of your questions about moving to France, to talk through your situation, to talk through your different visa options. That is something that you can schedule at any time. I'll give you the link one more time. This call will be available for the next week. We're going to leave it up so you can watch the replay, so other people can watch the replay as well. You'll be getting, if you registered, you'll get an email to watch the recording also. So thanks so much for coming. I do appreciate showing up and all of your great questions. If you are registered to the email list, if you registered for this one, then you'll just get an email notification for all of the Q&As that we're going to be doing. I'm going to do one a month. They're mostly going to be the first Monday of the month. There's a couple where I think November 1st is a holiday, so we're not going to, we're going to do it on the 8th. But you'll get notified in advance. I'm going to post on social media, and everything has been scheduled out through July. So we're really looking forward to these. I think they're going to be super helpful for you guys over the next couple months. We did stream this live to the Your Franceformation Facebook page, so go over and give us a like. We streamed it live into the Americans in France group, so you can go check it out there as well. We'll be uploading the recording. Our clients are going to get access to a library of recordings. So all of the Q&As that are recorded are going to go into a video library that you'll get access to, and we're just going to note, what questions were asked at what point, so that you can easily find the answers that you're looking for. So thank you so much, and I'm going to end it there. Take care.